And if the table is too small, I keep saying it, either make the table bigger or create your own.
Welcome, Baroness Sandip Verma, beautifully from the UK to me here in Australia. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the Daily Dose, and it's such a pleasure to have you here.
You can't stand by waiting for validation from others when you know you've got the ability or the potential to do something yourself. Asked about, gender equality, or we've talked about inclusion on disability, or even on mental health, which, remember, not that long ago, we didn't talk about freely because it seemed such a taboo subject to even touch. But I think the difficulty we have is that we're trying to think in silos.
Welcome, Baroness Sandip Verma, beautifully from the UK to me here in Australia. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the Daily Dose, and it's such a pleasure to have you here. A woman, I want to say to anybody listening, is not only a privilege to have her here as part of UK Parliament, where she's been appointed since 2006, but the many roles that she's had and her advocacy for women is one to be considered one of the highest in the world. She has done so much work and continues to. She hails from the UK, but also has both an Asian heritage and a background that she will share with you, because I can't ever do it justice. Baroness Sandip Verma, welcome so much into the room with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute joy. And what an introduction. Wow. How do I top that? These are always difficult things when you're talking about yourself. But I think the important thing, of course, is that, we have a conversation that is nice, candid, honest, and open. Because the way to bring real positive change anywhere in the world is when you actually start peeling off the bits of the barriers that stop you from doing things. So, I fell into politics. I was determined to do business. I was always determined that I was going to be a disruptor, even from a very early age, because if you don't accept the norm because it doesn't include everybody, then you're a disruptor. And I think to anybody listening out there, if you feel that you're being excluded, then go and find a way of making yourself and others included.
I love that. We had a lovely conversation prior to coming in and chatting with each other, and I've had the pleasure of knowing you, knowing of you for a year and knowing you and beginning to know you middle of last year. Your generosity and your work, I think, lead so many rooms to open. And one of the things we did talk about was the people that need to be in the room and the fight to get into the room. And we talk about it often, also knowing who your tribe is. And I think it'd be really useful for people to hear about how you advocate to get people into the room and why you do that.
So let's look at the why first, shall we? Because I think the why is the important piece that everybody listening, everybody that they can take the message out to after they've heard, is that the why is so important, because without a diverse voice at the table, in the room, the ability for people all to feel that they can reach their full potential is so, so important. And so the why to me is that we are richer, whether it's community, whether it's political, whether it's business. The why is really important, that table attracts everybody, but allows everybody a place at it. And if the table is too small, I keep saying it, either make the table bigger or create your own. But you don't have to wait for permission. You can't stand by waiting for validation from others when you know you've got the ability or the potential to do something yourself. So the why is the important thing. And Graziella, even more important than that is getting the advocacy from others to help support it. And that's what I often try and create. is create platforms, opportunities where you've got the leaders, the decision makers, and those that have the potential, those that are the disruptors, those that are the people whose actual lens of something, seeing something different, is in the room together. And I think most people like to sit with likes similar to themselves, sound like themselves, look like themselves. And what I'm trying to do is make that room much more technicolor.
I'm going to touch on that technicolor, the technicolor room. You know, we'll be in the room and we'll say there are people that need to be in this room who can't advocate for themselves. So, you know, in the position that you have, you advocate to get them into the room. Very similar to that, where I'll often stand someplace and we're talking about something. I say, but the people that need to talk from experience are not in this room. We need to have their voices or have them in this room. And part of that is there are trends that are changing now for us in the world that we work in, which is both, you know, the education, the advocacy, the ensuring that communities are uptaking and being responsive. And the next step in this is probably going to be how we get those people into the room who haven't traditionally been there. What excites you about this, and how do you intend to do it?
So there's a lot of really amazing stuff that's happening all around us. And you know, we had some of the worst times that our lifetimes are ever going to see when we went through the pandemic. And suddenly life sort of stood still for everyone. And yet we were still able to communicate, right? Because the advances of technology enabled us to still have a conversation across the world because of all the brilliant platforms that suddenly became very popular. And I think we've got to embrace the fact that we're going to do things differently. We can't leave people outside of that technology. So, you know, it's really important that everybody is able to access and understand how to utilize it to its maximum. But also ask the tech people who are creating the technologies to be able to make sure there's a social, emotional face to everything we're doing. So I think for me, it's trying to bring the best of both the modern technical world with the really important age old world of social skills, community skills, emotional skills. That intelligence needs to merge in with technology.
You know, it's quite interesting because my theme for this year became one of, you know, where is it that we can have inclusive intelligence? Because I feel that, and to me, that means, in very simple terms, you have to educate, inform, and enable, because it's not necessary that you even know that a room exists that you need to be in. And powerlessness is something that we talk about, you know, when we talk about the right to be someplace or the same starting point, and not having it, or perhaps to be withheld from that starting point. You know, there are so many dynamics in power. And when we look at mental health, which is the field that I've come from, the power to a community is really its health. So health economics, social economics plays an incredible role in where a country's economics sit, because the paradigm of how we feel about something is often where we're either going to be economically successful and contributors to our society, or be falling, you know, into fields where we perhaps need to rely upon society to help us through. So if we take that very big picture of social and health economics and mental health, and we look at the SDGs, and we look at the sort of the propensity now for the growth of attention on women and growth of attention on youth, we can see that there is still quite a gap that we need to close. Why do you think that gap is still there, even post-pandemic, post the connectivity we have in technology? Is there something socially we need to change?
Yeah, I think, look, I think there's huge amount of work to be done around the fact that we've still not reconciled how we have a discussion which doesn't exclude a genuine desire for people to all be in the room. So when we've talked in the past about, you know, gender equality, or we've talked about inclusion on disability, or even on mental health, which, you know, remember, not that long ago we didn't talk about freely because it seemed such a taboo subject to even touch. But I think the difficulty we have is that we're trying to think in silos. You know, let's deal with this part of the problem and maybe it'll have an impact, without actually thinking all of the other parts need to be in the room too. And nothing should be vilified, everything should be included, so we can have an honest, open debate. You know, I've often gone into meetings where they've spoken about gender equality for women, but the vilification of men is so, it's so acidic that, you know, you don't want to have a conversation where you are being so negative about a gender that you need in the room to be part of the constructive conversation. Male advocacy is as important, because if you're changing the social order, everybody's got to fit in. And they may fit in differently, but they've got to fit in. And how do we make that transition where everybody feels valued if we're not having a conversation where we feel free enough to be able to have the people coming into the room and having a conversation saying, well, these are the areas we in the past have found challenging, but equally, these are the areas you must also find challenging in transition. How are we going to have that sort of seamless transition which enables everybody to feel that they are not going to be either vilified or excluded, or that there's another label going to be attached to them that makes them not want to be in that room talking about it with you?
Really interesting topic, and one I'm really passionate about, because I think it's underpinned by something that we, again, have had some conversations about. There is a tendency for the power imbalance to also show itself through communication. So this is where the intelligent inclusion comes in. And that's as much as saying, you know, even with what we do, you know, we have these 4 pillars that we work with: education, professionals, working with social impact, and which often is focused on women and youth. And then we also work with sport. I think one of the things I take from sport, which I really love, is when you get a really good coach who works with athlete-centered coaching that's enabling the athlete or the person to acquire the skills, so that you no longer have to yell at them from the sidelines or go through the drill over and over, or ask the question, so why did you do that? How could you do that differently? What did you learn from this particular piece of play? You're not facilitating. They're actually doing it for themselves. And I think that when we look at inclusion, the education piece is big, but the communication piece is even bigger. And that's where the dynamic of power can sometimes be, you know, be seen as bullying. And we need to be very careful about the language that we use, because we can all become that person under stress who reacts or falls back to what we learned. We've got to think in measured ways when we're communicating in those rooms. We can't vilify men, and we can't vilify or perhaps even look at, you know, a culture in a particular way. We've got to be saying it's a person's behavior, not necessarily broad brushing an entire gender or an entire culture. It is one person. So we need to call that person out and say, okay, that person spoke like that. Maybe they were triggered. How do we change, one, the trigger? Two, how do we not vilify an entire group because of one person's communication? Because we've all had
But
experiences, you know.
yeah. No, I think to that point though, I think, look, we, just as we learn behavior, there is so much that we've got to unlearn. And just as equally, some people deal with stressful situations in a different way to perhaps other people do. That the point is, unless we had all of those diverse emotions in the room, we would all be rather, it would be a rather boring community, right? I think what I always say to people is that, passion and emotions, high emotions sometimes get muddled up. You know, there used to be a time when you were seen strong because you had a loud voice that could bang on the table and the power was in your hands because you were the leader. Nowadays, of course, we're looking at leadership in a really different way. We want a leadership. We want the leaders to be much more inclusive. Them to understand that they have to hear all voices. And the problem, of course, with all of these new trends that we're trying to bring in is we're not actually also teaching people how to unlearn behaviors that have been normalized. So I think a lot of work is being done, but there is so much more to do, and we want to do it quickly because things change too quickly, and yet they don't change quick enough. I know that's a complete contradiction of terms, but it is because technology is making us move in the fast lane, but our behavioral change is going in the slow lane. How do we make sure that actually when we want everybody to merge in, that we bring them both to the middle lane?
I'll have to send you all our programs. One of the things that's one of the so for the last 30 years, that's the one thing I've been driven to do. How do I take what you do in a room? How do you take that piece that you put in a room and not dilute it, but replicate it in such a way that it's affordable and accessible? Everyone can get hold of it. It's not necessarily just me teaching it, and you've got many voices so that you have people learning emotively and also skills based wise to speed themselves up so they can slow down and change the uptake. So the unlearn, relearn. And I'm fascinated that you brought that up because we haven't even talked about this audience. But when I was, only 30 years old and I was presenting at the United Nations, it I think it was just after 9/11, I basically spoke about how to learn how to learn, to unlearn, relearn. And it was, again, this propensity to want to do that. And I think the similarity, the things you talk about, I love your value set, what you were talking about, and the way you bring such wisdom, weighted wisdom into the room. And you are in one of the most influential rooms, UK Parliament. You spend your time there, yet you open your doors to everybody. How do you balance it all? Because you have this amazing propensity to be I've seen you present at so many of the things that I've been at, and that's only a smattering of your diary, and yet you make time for things like this, which is incredible for me, and the audience that's listening. But I do think there is so much that you do in your portfolio. How do you manage it all, and how do you choose the right people to lean on to help you manage that?
So first of all, the saying, give a job to a busy person, it gets done. I think
do.
those of us that are driven, we have a value system that we know what we want to do is to make sure that when we leave this planet and go off into the ether somewhere, that there is an ability for others who hopefully would have taken something from you to be able to keep the openness going, the ability to be able to be generous with their time, generous with their contacts, generous where we need to. With obviously, people are incredibly generous when I want to do events because they believe in the systems that I'm trying to change. And so their generosity of either sponsorships or friendships or widening the networks. And the most important thing for me is that every contact I have, if it becomes a contact of help, use, assistance, support to somebody else, then that's a really good thing. Because my books shouldn't be closed diaries that, die with me. They should be there as a living document for people to dip into when and if they need it. And finding time, as I said, most of us, we just manage time because if you're passionate about something, you know, I always look at myself as that sort of nurturing parent. Your children will fall down several times, and several times you'll help them up, and several times you'll show them how to perhaps do something different the next time. Life is like that for me. I just think the world is such a beautiful place, and if we want to make it and keep it beautiful, we have to gather people around us who are like us. And luckily, I always say, you attract the people that are like you. If you're kind and generous with your time, you find kind and generous people.
I love that sentiment, and I love seeing how you operate and the way that you graciously open your room to many. There are many tasks you do, and I do think that most leaders listening to this, or those that are busy, and quite often we say that you do give tasks to a busy person, but there's also a busyness about the gender that we're trying to help in our social impact projects, because we look at 90% of the world's work is done by women, but they yet only own 1% of its property. And we're sitting in a financially fluid time where things are changing. You've got Bitcoin, you've got economies of scale starting to change. You've got the capacity now for investors to be saying, well, actually, we see huge return in investing in women. We also see microfinance poignantly looking towards women in developing countries. And I know that we both have had a huge passion and have thrown ourselves behind projects in two large continents, that of India and Africa. And the reason being is there has been a propensity to have not invested in women in the past, and a need to start to do that, but also the youth that are coming through and a change. And also not to vilify men, to simply say there is a cultural norm that we can support. If you would like any help with that, we're here. Because again, we did talk about this. It's so important to not impose, but to walk with people. What are the greatest techniques that you use working in continents like Africa and India around health, education, facilitation, to walk beside and not impose? What do you recommend all of those choosing to either, to help, in inverted commas, to go in, facilitate, to want to put themselves forward, their business forward, or to do business in those continents? How should they do it?
Yeah, look, I think there are so many different ways of doing what you want to do to help change for the better society. And I think part of it is about respecting where you're going and how you're going to get them on board with the leaders. Apologies. With the leaders, because unless the leaders buy in, you're never going to change society. So the
But you
first
have,
thing you do is
you have a
work with
glass,
the leaders.
have a glass of water. I'm going to stop and restart. So you have a glass of water. Hang on. So, Sandy, one of the greatest things I think for all leaders is when we're taking on social action projects, or we're taking on something that's bearing relevance and it's in a different culture to our own. Now, you and I share a heritage that has an Anglo-Indian heritage there, and there is a propensity to go back as non-residential Indians and to work with or to take part in, or even if it was a place of your birth, there's a tie. Yet we've spoken before, you have a passion for the continent of India and of Africa. How do you recommend, people tackle going in to work beside a culture, not over a culture? Because we have talked about that before, is the respect of, and also, sometimes there's a possessiveness when you go in and you're working beside different firms, because they become possessive over you and what they have, and then the work doesn't get done. So how do you take on getting the work done, dealing with that possessiveness, because we can't own people or the problem, but working beside something so we actually do have social impact?
Yeah, and being impactful is the biggest underpin of everything we do. So, and it's got to be positive for not just ourselves, but for the people that we're trying to engage with. And I think there are several layers to it. I think the first thing is buy-in from leaders, decision makers at the top. and making sure that those people we're trying to change help change through societal thinking about how they see themselves in society and how others see them, is made much easier then when they see their own leaders supporting what we're trying to do. So I think it's a conversation that has to be both ways. We ask what it is that they want to see happen, and in most cases, what women want to see, of course, is financial independence, financial stability, the ability to be able to take decisions for themselves and their families, to be able to contribute. And in many circumstances, is not made possible because of the way the countries themselves lay things out. So bringing leaders in, bringing political figures in, enables us to have that conversation too. So I think I always say there's so many different layers, and you have to morph yourself into the layer you're in, and you have the language. You have to use a language that's going to be understood at that layer. But I think over the years, what I've learned is that I would rather, first of all, go in and have a listening mode rather than have a telling mode, because people tend to think that they know better than the people that you're trying to engage with. And that's never the case. Never.
How do you deal with possession? Because you can do that. You can go into listening mode. And then there are obviously within the countries and the continents we're working with. So we have Africa with 55 countries and it's a continent. We have India, one country, but such a vast range of change from north to south to east to west. We look at those differences. You might go to Kerala, then you might go to Bihar, Jharkhand, or Gumla, or you might go up into, you might go to Uttar Pradesh, or you might go up into Mumbai. Just there's a change. But one of the things that I think is really important, and this is often the case, is you go into that relationship, choosing those relationships, but also the relationship of possession. And if we dial down everything we've been talking to, control and possession are two things that can really detract from getting anything done. How do you recommend we get past that as both business people and communities? Because it's that control and possession, that middleman kind of sense. The person who's the connector can become the controller as opposed to the connector, How do you keep the connection moving without displacing the connector in those communities, but also getting past things like corruption and also getting that effectiveness to happen? What do you recommend when businesses go on the ground to be able to provide services or to provide funding or necessary assistance?
So I think there are, again, all of these issues that you're rightly raising, rightly talking about here today, is about building trust, right? Build trust, build confidence, feel that you have some control, that the person opposite you has some control, and that there are some common things that bind us together. And whether it's the middleman or whether it's just the end user, the person who's going to get it, I mean, at the end of the day, it first starts with a relationship. Now, that relationship is the key to most things. And again, this is where I sort of want us to engage much more in the way we look at our social skills, our emotional skills, alongside all the technical great stuff that's going on. And I think, trust is something that is very easily misplaced, because unless people can actually, in my case, I say people earn their trust. But we also should never be naive to feel that we are the people who know everything, and that there are organizations that are already on the ground that have the interests of all businesses. If you're talking about business in particular, that have businesses at heart. So why are we not making sure that we collaborate, partner, do much more engagement with them before you actually go out onto the ground to deliver? So, for example, in Africa, we're currently in one of the countries that we operate in. We're trying to skill up border women taxi drivers. The borders are the motorbike taxis. And what we have found is that by giving them some qualifications, by giving them the skills, by giving them some respectability for what they are doing, by certificating them, actually that trust between them and now the customer is much bigger. So the ability to earn much more and be financially more independent has suddenly become a new world for them. But
Mm.
the great positive side of that is their communities now start to respect them more.
The restoration of respect, or the treatment. So there's a thing, discipline equates to freedom, respect gives you freedom. It's so very much based in communication, and so very much about how, again, you said we win trust. Sometimes we're working against some longer standing traditions, which I know you've had to do, and you've had to educate people to get them past what can hold you back from maybe calling out behaviors that can be called bullying in those communities sometimes, so that you move past, yes, we can respect, yes, we can try to build trust, we can try everything we know. But if we end up in a situation where it's just, we can't get what we need to get to the people, then there are other things that we need to do. How do you deal with people in difficult situations? And this will be probably one of the most important questions that we sort of verse today, is dealing with people in difficult situations yet having an effective outcome. What's your method that helps you through, both as a leader and also in work as a female leader, which I don't like to say female leader having it differently, but we still are in an era where unfortunately there is a difference.
Yeah, and I think it is a really important. It's a really important question, because the problem we still have is that we are still living with the norms of many, many decades, many, many practices that have become accepted. And we've built them in thinking that these are cultural and therefore cannot change. And, what was maybe accepted 100 years ago is now seen as abuse. It can easily be seen as abuse, where you are your liberty of freedom of thinking, freedom of movement, freedom of being able to, spend money. The choices are taken away from you. To me, is all a form of abuse. So we've got to really. I think often as not, we re-cement old practices because we're too frightened to challenge the norm. And when you are so frightened because you want validation from your community all the time, then all you're doing is helping a outdated norm continue. And I think if we are making sure that our young people are better educated today than they've ever been, making sure that our young girls feel that they can go out there and achieve whatever they want to achieve, then we have to also change all of the other things that restrict them from doing it. And I think part of the problem that people like me see is that it's okay to talk about it until you have to do it. And when you're asked to do it and you challenge the system, then suddenly you retract backwards, and you retrench into upholding those very norms that have held you back. Now, maybe not everybody is as open and brave and outspoken as people like you and I are. But if we are going to change the world for a better place, then we are the ones who are going to have to make those changes. We do not want people from outside of our cultures to come, because then it looks as if they're superimposing something that looks very old, new, colonial. So we have to remove some of those barriers ourselves if we're not going to want others to change it for us. But I just feel passionate that if I had the freedoms and the liberty to grow up in a country that enables me to have a voice, then I need to use my voice. And if people feel that that is me stepping out of their comfort zone, I'm sorry, but then I can't do anything about that for you. But I'm not doing it for you because you're already entrenched in that idea. And to be quite frank, shame on you. Because if you are willing to continually uphold something that holds other people back, then shame on you. Because children will look to their parents for change. Parents will look for their siblings and their friends for change. And if none of all of that can come together, then I'm afraid all we're doing is reinforcing practices that really should have been put in the garbage a long, long time ago.
So interesting. I had a stunning thing happen, and it was out of nowhere. A couple of things actually. Thinking, and you mentioned it because you talked about colonial change. So Maltese Italian, two colonies, if you want, the colonial kind of. And I recall the first time I spoke at the House of Lords, one of the people from my board wrote a speech and said, "Oh, I've written a speech because I think it'd be fantastic." And I didn't look at the speech till I was on the airplane, thinking, "Oh, I'll have a look at this before I go in." And it in the speech it said, as a woman who comes from a colony and having been colonized, and I thought, I would never in a million years say that. Sorry, no deference to or insult to the crown, but I would never say that. It's just not something I would say. From my heart, I would say I'm proudly Maltese Italian, born in Mumbai. I have Anglo-Indian heritage as well. And I'm proudly also from Australia. And all of them touch upon being a colony. But would I talk about having been colonized? No. I would instead talk about my identity in very different ways, and a privilege to be in the UK House of Lords with the esteemed people in the room, being Her Royal Highness, being other people at that stage. And I had to just really take a deep breath and feel like I've known this person for 5 years, yet they don't know that that's not something I could ever say. And it's really interesting. I had to look at them differently from a very white colonized background, which I've never done before.
Yeah.
And looked at them how they see me,
And I think you've put on the head. I think this is the issue. This is the conversations that we should be having. And it's not, I say to people, we can't change history. But, and history actually is a great way to take reflection of what we don't want as well as what we do want in the future. And if we want to shape a much more relevant world for everyone, where everybody feels that they are valued, then what we do is take the lessons from what we've learned, which is laid out because it's happened, to where we want to go, which has not happened, because we've got to be able to shape it now because that's where we are. And I just feel people feel very comfortable when something goes wrong, is to be able to put it into a box and say, actually, it's cultural, or actually, this is how it's always been. No, it hasn't. And it's up to each and every one of us to be able to say how we intend to shape it better.
Baroness Verma, I can only say today has been amazing because you've touched on so many important things. If I summarize this for our audience, we've touched upon the inclusion aspect. And if you're not in the room, then find a way to get in the room. And if you don't know that the room exists, then it's up to those who are in positions, who are in the room, to say what needs to be in that room and who needs to be in that room. And the essence of that is also about communication and power, that we can't lean on heritage or cultural misfortunes or anything that's occurred to us. We must take our identity from today and give deference to the things that have been there to shape our identity, but perhaps also now look very much at, we are in 2025, and if we are going to see difference, then it's going to come from action. And as much as we need to speed up, we need to slow down, because if we don't understand that there is a need to learn again, and that is unlearn, relearn, learning how to learn, going back to, I pick up things because I'm emotionally attached, even knowing that can be a penny drop for most people. And understanding the relationship isn't about shame because you haven't gotten there. It's more about the opportunity to speak up without pointing blame and saying, look, this is something I would like to achieve. I'm not getting past my barriers. Those barriers might be that I'm being held back, might be that I'm holding myself back, might be that I am, in a situation that is because no one knows that there's even a barrier there. And all of it comes from just putting your blue skies wish list approach out there and saying, I would like to achieve this. How do I do it? So maybe that's a great place for everybody who's listening to this to start. This is what my dream is. And I love that last line and pardon me for going to Pretty Woman. Everyone has a dream. I have a dream. And I say that because I look at beautiful LA and what's happened there. And I need to say my heart goes to everybody who has had such great loss there, because the loss is compounded by the fact that they aren't even insured. And I can only imagine that now we need to, as a world, look at this. But there are so many situations, just like a LA burning, the burning propensity of war that continues, that daily wars that continue behind closed doors that we don't see, and the struggles amidst our youth population who do not have advantage or access. And how do we create that? That's a burden that lies on every single one of us. And we must no longer just say, we must just now begin to act. And if we don't know who our tribe is, begin with knowing who is similar to yourself and voice what you want to see. And it might just be in that room.
Totally.
I've loved talking to you. Absolutely loved talking to you today. I think I could talk for hours. I say that many times over, but I mean it very sincerely. And I wonder if I could just ask you for a last piece of wisdom to those that are listening, to find a way to get that voice and to not back down when they find that voice to say what their dream is.
Yeah, I always say to people, you are the makers of your dreams. You're also the deliverers of your dreams. You've got to just find the right people to come on board to support you. And trust me, they're there. Just be brave enough to ask. And to those leaders in the room, be brave enough to take a chance on somebody, because you will be amazed at when you give a chance to somebody, how they rise to the challenge.
Thank you for today. I'm so looking forward to the next time we speak. Have a beautiful day, and the time you've given us has been immense and amazing, and I know people are going to get so much value from listening to you. Baroness Verma, UK Parliament, advocate for women, and also advocate for youth and children, working across the continents of Africa and India. There's not much she can't do. Please take time to listen to her wisdom today.